It was almost 2 years ago now that the Prime Minister made his major speech on dementia, and was remarkable for a couple of reasons. Firstly, that no British Prime Minister had ever made a speech on dementia before, and secondly, that it is the only health issue that the Prime Minister has focused on as a personal crusade that he's taken on. And Jeremy Hunt, I think, knowing who the boss is, has taken it on as well. And I think it's important to recognise that that has created a climate in the last couple of years that has seen dramatic change. I was a little bit sceptical. I was very pleased when the Prime Minister came and spoke at our conference, but I was a little sceptical because I thought he might, like many other politicians, have it as chip wrapper within a couple of weeks and would have moved on to some other issue. But actually, to his enormous credit and to the credit of the Secretary of State, they've stuck with it and they've maintained it as a key issue high on the political and health and social care and housing agenda in a way that it never has been before. In fact, to the extent that we had a problem the other day when the Prime Minister's office suddenly phoned up and said he wanted to come to the Dementia Friendly Communities Champion Group that was set up by him that I co-chair with Angela Rippon. And so he suddenly turns up at the Champion Group meeting, which was great in one sense because it showed his commitment. But for Angela and myself chairing the meeting, it was an enormous nuisance because everyone started showing off to the Prime Minister, and then we had to schedule an extra meeting afterwards to do all the business we couldn't do because he had come. But it was a good sign. Now, why is it that they've got this focus? Well, I just would highlight the key statistics that, as you see here, it's the size of the challenge. On the left, you can see 800,000 people living with dementia in the UK today, and that will rise to something like 1 million by the end of this decade. And the cost is a phenomenal £23 billion per annum, which is some research that we commissioned from the LSE a couple of years ago. And that money is money both lost to the economy and the direct costs of health and social care support, and it's money largely not well spent. We know that people with dementia, on average, spend twice as long in hospital when they're in there as a frail elderly person, not because of their dementia, but because of some other condition. They've had a fracture or they've got an infection. They will spend twice as long in hospital as their fellow elderly people at a cost of, £300 a day. Also, people will end up going into residential homes and nursing care earlier with dementia than they need to because of a collapse of the support in the community, and often their prime carer, who again may be a frail elderly person with, as Lord Filkin pointed out, some health concerns of their own with the long-term conditions that many people face, that person collapses, and so the person ends up being moved into a residential care home or nursing home, which is probably not where they want to be, earlier than they might need to be there. But we do know, despite those figures of nursing homes, that two-thirds of people living in the community, two-thirds of people with dementia are living in the community. And again, referring back to Lord Filkin's comments, the majority are in mainstream housing, with a fairly small proportion in specialist housing. And one-third of the people with dementia living in the community live alone. At the same time, there are then over 500,000 people who are prime carers for people with dementia. So it's a big challenge, it's a big issue, and I think this highlights why the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State have made it an ongoing issue that they're determined to tackle. We're very careful in the Alzheimer's Society to make sure that we reference everything we do against the expressed wishes of people with dementia. And although it's difficult sometimes to get through and understand what it is people with dementia want, particularly with the more advanced stages of dementia, it is not impossible. And with care and attention and some of the work that people like Joseph Rowntree have done, Bupa as a commercial company have done, you can actually find good ways of accessing the opinions and experiences of people with dementia. And we highlighted these key requests from people with dementia, which came enshrined in the National Dementia Declaration a couple of years ago. And this is really our Bible against which we judge what we're achieving. So what we're told by people with dementia is that they want to have personal choice and control or influence over decisions, to know that services are designed around them and with their needs in mind, to have support that helps them live their life, to have the knowledge and know-how to get what they want, to live an enabling and supportive environment where they feel valued and understood, to have a sense of belonging and of being part of a family, a community, and civic life, and to know that there's research going on offering hope for a better future for themselves and others. So actually, not very different from all the rest of us, surprisingly, or rather not surprisingly actually, that it is the same issues that drive the motivation of everybody in society that also drives the motivation of people living with dementia. Funnily enough, when you get dementia, you don't suddenly change. I talked to somebody the other day who was a man who was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's in his 50s, and he was still working. And he said, frighteningly, half the people he knows cut him off immediately, as if he had suddenly changed overnight from the Tuesday when he hadn't been diagnosed to the Wednesday when he had been diagnosed. But he is the same person. He is the same person with the same desires and the same needs and the same wants to live in a community that is supportive. So that national declaration is to us incredibly important because it gives a very clear statement of the everyday needs and the everyday expectations of people with dementia. When you look at the particular area of housing, these are some of the comments that have come back from the research we've done over the last couple of years. Just 3 quotes I thought highlighted some of the most significant issues that need tackling. And again, not rocket science, not impossible, but very clear challenges for people living with dementia trying to live in the housing that they want to be in. First comment from a carer with somebody with dementia living in rented mainstream housing. We were living in a house that wasn't suitable for my wife's medical needs. We had stairs and she can't walk up the stairs. The stairs were really murdering, and that's why we got the bungalow. Second one, somebody living in owner-occupied housing. I don't want to put her in a care home. I want to stay with her for as long as possible. To part with her, I couldn't do that, unless it came to something serious and I couldn't look after her. And finally, a carer of a person with dementia again who said, I've got Parkinson's and my wife has Alzheimer's. The reason we came here was my getting Parkinson's, not my wife getting Alzheimer's. A couple of years ago, in 2012, we published a report called Home Truths, which I hope some of you have seen, which was a report investigating what is the case around housing, what is the experience of people with dementia and the housing they had. And we came up with 4 very clear recommendations. Firstly, that housing and housing services are effective mechanisms for supporting people with dementia in the community. It sounds obvious to say it, but we do get cloistered, particularly in the health and social care world, and think that the way you tackle with disease, the way you tackle with conditions that people live with, is through the health service, and if you really stretch your mind, the social care services. Actually, the most prime way you can support people to live with their dementia is through the housing that you provide to them. Secondly, that there should be a choice of housing options for people with dementia, and this was patently not there, and again reflects back to the comments that Lord Filkin opened this conference with this morning. Thirdly, that people with dementia and their carers should have access to information on housing options, services and sources of funding adaptations. There is a real lack of accessible, good quality information around the housing options available to people with dementia. There's a lack of information generally about the health and social care support, but particularly when you come and look at housing, it's more difficult for people with dementia to get the information they need to help them make the choices and decisions with their carers. And finally, that people with dementia should have access to homes designed around their needs. And again, this reflects particularly the comments Anthea was just making around the kind of environment that people want to live in and the changes that can be made. So since that report was published, I just wanted to highlight some of the enormous successes, because you guys have made enormous progress in the last couple of years. Firstly, that we've got more evidence now on the role of housing and supporting people with dementia. We actually know that we can make a difference. Some of the work that's been done by the Housing Federation, the Foundation and Dementia Services Development Centre report, the Dementia Finding Housing Solutions report. This report outlines the way in which housing services are supporting people with dementia. It's just one of a number of reports that's been produced. So we do now get more information and more evidence than we've had before. Secondly, housing is recognised as a key partner in the Prime Minister's Challenge on Dementia, and Jeremy is a key member of the Prime Minister's Champion Group on Health and Social Care Transformations that is working hard to come up with a new formula, a new way of supporting people. Thirdly, that housing plays an important role in developing dementia-friendly communities. The champion group that I lead with Angela Rippon also covers housing and also looks at the way that housing can make that difference, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And finally, that many housing organisations are demonstrating innovation in supporting people with dementia. It was mentioned earlier, but I just wanted to reiterate the importance of the Orbit Charitable Trust report that was published just last month, looking at the way in which smaller housing associations can support people with dementia, and very clear evidence from that report. And part of that report, I thought, was a really powerful message from the Orbit Heart of England strategy on dementia and housing, showing what difference a housing association can make by just sitting down and planning the interventions that it's going to have. One example that I wanted to just pick out, it's difficult picking from all the examples, but this seems to be a good example of what you can do in a relatively short period of time, is the Riverside Home Improvement Agency and what they've done. And they've found ways of helping people with dementia live safely in their own homes for longer through intelligent design and adaptations. The HIA team retro-decorate people's homes, enabling them to choose vintage furniture and items that bring back memories of happy times, such as old transistor radios, 1960s holiday posters or mid-century chairs. Familiar objects that can make people feel calmer, meaning that there's less requirement for medication. They also help individuals remember their daily routine, such as sitting down for a meal. And they've also used simple design procedures to help people maintain the routine and live independently in their homes for longer. Open-fronted drawers so you can see what's there. Glare-free lighting so that things aren't reflected back and cause confusion. And reorganising mirrors so you don't have the frightening experience of seeing somebody which you don't recognise as yourself and think there's somebody else in your own home. A little bit of attention to doing things differently and just thinking a little bit beyond the way you normally think. A great example I came across the other day was one housing provider who thought that the best possible way to support somebody with dementia who often went out and left their keys in the house and so got locked out was to have a voice-activated system. So when you open the door, it said, "Please remember to take your keys." Sounds very sensible until the research showed that actually what happened was the person with dementia thought there was somebody else in the house and got terrified by the fact that there was somebody else in their house. So what sounded like a simple solution, you just need to think a little bit more and you realise it may not be the right solution. But that example from Riverside, I think, shows how you can make a very tangible difference that allows people to carry on living in their homes in an environment that's safe and supportive for them. So what I wanted to do is just give you 3 slides on some of the challenges that we've identified that we ask you to look at in the years coming ahead, and indeed during the course of today. I think it'll be a great opportunity to pick these up. So the first one is future-proofing new housing and adapting existing housing stock. Lifetime Home Design's guidance could incorporate guidance on dementia. There's no reason why we can't expand that guidance to reconsider it to provide guidance on design for dementia and standards that can be built into building regulations and planning notices. It may take a long time to get some of this through, but that's a very firm, solid way of getting the standards that need to be there. And then existing housing stock can be retrofitted, if you like, to actually adapt it to make it available and supportive for people with dementia, the kinds of things that I just mentioned in terms of Riverside. So that's number 1, is the future-proofing of new housing and adapting existing stock. Number 2, again referred to a minute ago by Anthea, is that issue of assistive technology. It can make an enormous difference to the ability of both the person with dementia and their carer. And one of the groups we've got working at the moment as a subgroup or a task and finish group of the Prime Minister's Champion Group is one on assistive technology, which is being coordinated by Tunstall, but bringing together a whole number of providers and academic bodies and so on to actually look at what difference we can make. But technological solutions mean people with dementia can remain independent for much, much longer than would otherwise be the case. New housing can be built with technology embedded or easily installed. And technology, again, can be imported and introduced to existing housing stock at relatively low cost and giving that independence and that ability to be supported in a way that was never there before. And the third one is workforce skilling. I think this is an area, and again, it's interesting how these 3 presentations fit together. We are appalling at the way in which we support our workforce across housing, health and social care. We often have the worst paid people in society looking after the most vulnerable people in society, and what's remarkable is what a good job they do, given the fact that they're so often neglected and so often so poorly supported. We need to be investing more in training and supporting our workforce. There's some fantastic examples where housing associations, local authorities and others have worked really well to improve the quality of the training and support, and that means they retain staff better, people feel more in part of their community, they provide better support to the residents and the people living in their area. So there is an enormous amount that can be done, and we need to integrate that training across housing and across health and social care. People need to be able to get the advice they want, where they want it, from the person they trust, not be sent somewhere else that they don't feel comfortable. So looking to the future, these are three areas which I just want to flag as important to address as we go a little bit beyond the immediate. We must get that integration of health and social care. The point I just made about people getting the advice where they want it, when they want it, is absolutely fundamental. And that integration must include the housing provision as fundamental. If the person you know and the person you trust is the person who provides your housing, maybe the caretaker, maybe somebody from the housing provider who you see regularly, that is the person who should be able to signpost you to the dementia care and support you need. We need to get early diagnosis and intervention. Sadly, at the moment, less than half the people with dementia actually get diagnosed before they die. If that was cancer, and half the people with cancer died of their tumour before they were diagnosed, there'd be an absolute outcry. So we have to get that up, because only once you've identified that somebody's got dementia can you provide the right support to them in housing, but also in things like lasting power of attorney, in access to the kinds of services we provide from Alzheimer's Society. So early diagnosis and intervention is critical, and I'm very pleased that the government have adopted a target. Actually, no, I shouldn't say a target, because that's what the last government had. What this government has is quantifiable ambitions, I'm told. So they've got a quantifiable ambition to get to 2/3 of the population being diagnosed with dementia by 2015, and I think that's a great step forward. And finally, the work on dementia-friendly communities. We have to find a way of changing the way a whole society works. And the group that I co-chair is fascinating, because we have one person from each sector of society. We've got one supermarket, one bank, one insurance company, one energy provider. We've got a bishop. We've got someone from the Women's Institute, the chairman of the Bingo Association, and they all have a responsibility to work together to transform the way in which society as a whole supports people with dementia. And enables people to continue living in the communities they want to be in. And my challenge to the Netherlands is actually all the experience we've had talking to people with dementia is that they don't want to be moved into an artificial village that's been created for them. People actually want to carry on living in the towns, cities, villages that they live in, with people being more supportive, rather than moving to a more sort of Teletubby existence, which doesn't really work for most people. And this is just to highlight the dementia-friendly communities challenge. We know that only 47% of people from the survey we did last year actually feel that they're part of their community. And you'll see at the moment the number of things that people have had to drop when they've got dementia. 28% feel that they can't get out of the house, 22% don't take exercise, 16% haven't got access to transport, 23% can't go shopping, 9% say they've had to give up everything. So that level of exclusion could be so easily tackled, and we are beginning to see it tackled by the work we're doing in creating dementia-friendly communities. Again, was referred to a few moments ago, just the level of loneliness and isolation is staggering. 62% of people with dementia feel lonely. 62%. A massive, massive number of people. Another example I just wanted to move on to is the Housing 21's work, which is the peer support for people with dementia, the way in which we can tackle that loneliness. Again, it's not impossible to do. It's something that will be picked up later in the conference. We can find ways of enabling communities to be supportive of each other. And Housing 21's peer support groups are a great example of that, building the way in which people in the community, that people trust, that people know, can give that mutual support to colleagues and friends and neighbours that they otherwise would find quite isolated. And from Housing 21 is providing that support and that guidance to the peer support members so that they know how to feel safe and confident in the support they're giving. The other thing I wanted to finally mention is the Dementia Action Alliance. This gives you just visual show of the National Dementia Action Alliance and the housing-related bodies that are part of that. It's incredibly exciting to see how on both a national level and now with Dementia Action Alliances springing up all over the country, that people are coming together and they're finding ways of learning and developing and making things different. Now, the thing about the Dementia Action Alliance is you can't just join. You can't just pay a fee and join. You have to have an action plan, and that action plan is monitored. So every single one of the organisations shown here has made a commitment to go further and faster in tackling dementia and are held to account on a quarterly basis. And the same applies at the local level. So I'd really urge all of you to become part of the Dementia Action Alliance, both nationally, if you're a national organisation, but also locally in your community. But it's not just about organisations. The other part of it is about individuals, and I know this will be picked up again in one of the sessions later on this morning. But Dementia Friends, to me, is probably the most exciting thing we're doing. This is trying to change the whole atmosphere in society around people with dementia. The parallel, maybe, to me, is around physical disability, and it all came to a head, I thought, with the Paralympics in London, where we saw people as interested in the Paralympics as they were in the Olympics, and celebrating what people with physical disabilities could do, not concentrating on their disability, but concentrating on their ability. And I think we're trying to kickstart a similar programme of change that we've seen about the inclusion of people with disabilities in society, about the inclusion of people with dementia. So the Dementia Friends programme is aiming to reach 1 million people through awareness sessions by the end of next year. It's an ambitious target. They've done it in Japan. They've now reached 4.5 million people in Japan through exactly the same programme, so we've copied it from them. These are information sessions run by volunteers in their local communities. It's not training you to be dementia expert, it's enabling you to be dementia supportive. And every single one of those champions is taking forward a commitment to reach at least 150 people, and many are reaching far more. There's a guy up in Chester who's just clocked up 1,500 people that he's done awareness sessions for. I'm a bit more of a slow burn myself, and I've now 93, but I'm getting there. So it is an important programme because it enables people to feel part of a community. It enables people to feel strong and confident that they can be supporting the local person with dementia. And to give you the example that I love is the man I met who lives on his own, in his own house, and has dementia and was going to have to move into a nursing home. And we discovered that the reason he was going to have to move into a nursing home was that he couldn't get out to the shops and couldn't buy food. So although he had some social care support coming in, he was both isolated and unable to get the basic provisions of life. He lived on a bus route. So through a dementia awareness programme, we got the bus drivers on that bus company to be aware of dementia, and they recognised him. So they could get him on the bus and make sure that he was okay and that he got off at the right stop, which was where the supermarket was. We also worked with the supermarket so that the staff in the supermarket were aware of the fact he had dementia and were able to check that firstly he didn't go out to the shop taking lots of things he didn't want because he might have filled up his shopping basket with 5 bottles of washing up liquid and nothing else. But also didn't worry if he walked out the shop without paying because they knew who he was and they knew they could go and get the money from him later or next time he came in. And then they made sure he got back to the bus stop and the bus company made sure he got off at the stop outside his house. So via very simple intervention, we were enabled to keep that man living in the community where he wanted to be, supporting himself and living as good a life as it's possible to live with dementia. We can do it, and the central part of that is housing. The central part is the place you live, and that's why today's conference is so important, and I'm so delighted to be able to start the conference with you this morning. Thank you.